Hi there, everyone in Zoom world. I'm Michael Dukes, Director, Center for Land Use Efficiency. And today we are bringing you the second installment in our Landscape Summit, the second out of 11 sessions through the end of March, every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Last week we had the industry panel to talk about, state of the industry. And next week, we're going to have a couple speakers on alternative ground covers, biodiversity, and bird habitat. So stay tuned next week as well. But today, I'm here to introduce our two speakers for the day. And you're going to see that that topic is generally in the Central Florida area, where there's a lot of action going on related to water and landscapes and land development in general. Our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Yilin Zhuang. Did I get that right, Yilin? Okay, thanks. Yilin is relatively new in her position. I didn't count it up, Yilin, so you can tell us when you go live, but she's a regional specialized extension agent in water resources in the IFAS Extension Central District. Previously, she was with Marion County as a community resource efficiency agent, and she got her PhD in civil engineering at University of South Florida. Our second speaker today after Yilin will be Dr. Nick Taylor, who's a state specialized agent in water and energy use in the built environment. And Nick is in the Program for Resource Efficient Communities, which is within the Center for Land Use Efficiency, which is within IFAS, which is within UF. Confused yet? Anyhow, Nick works with utilities on conservation program evaluation. He leads the H2O SAVE program, which I think we're going to hear a lot about today. And he received his PhD from UF in Design, Construction, and Planning, College of Design, Construction, and Planning. So with that, we're going to start out with Yilin. And as always, please type your questions in the chat. And I will kind of feed those back to you, Yilin. We'll generally take those questions at the end of your talk, unless it's some clarification type of question. And then when we're finished with that, we'll switch over to Nick. If there are still questions coming in for Yilin, if we have time at the very end, we'll address those. But our plan is also this is being recorded, our plan is to post this on the web, and we will have an accompanying blog post, which that's where we handle more in-depth Q&A that comes out of this that we don't have time to handle today. So with that, Yilin, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes. And let me share my screen. All right, can you see my presentation? Great. And thank you for the introduction, Dr. Dukes. And just like you said, I'm new in my current position, and I think today marks 11 months into my new position as the regional specialized agent in water resources. So pretty interesting. The 11 months into my dual job is the 11 months in basically into the pandemic. So I think by now everyone is the tech savvy, at least the Zoom savvy. So I will try to keep this presentation interactive. And I understand some of you may use your tablet and you cannot do a lot interactive pools. So in that way, you feel free just to leave your questions in the comment section. All right, my name is Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in University of Florida IFAS Extension. And today I will take everyone on a journey of a collaborative planning for future water resources in Central Florida. It's now moving. All right, so this is the outline of my talk. I will give a brief background and the history of Central Florida Water Initiative, and then go through some highlights of recently approved 2020 Regional Water Supply Plan and some water conservation and alternative water supply options. So before I get started, I would like to ask you a question. And Emily, if you can launch the poll, have you heard of CFWI? I think the question is there. Oh, Is it still there?
I don't think it's the correct one. So have them just answer in the chat box.
Yeah, sounds great. So have you heard of CFWI? Please just leave in the chat box. Wow, that's so cool. On live, I see all the answers popping up.
Was that Deirdre Irwin who said no? I'm not sure. Just kidding.
Yeah, I think it's so far looks like mixed answers. I see a lot of yes now and also a lot of no. So for those who haven't heard of CFWI, so this talk, I will say will give you a basic understanding of CFWI. And for those who have already heard that, it's always good to refresh our memory. Okay, and answers are still going. So I'm gonna move on just for the sake of the time. For CFWI is the acronym of the Central Florida Water Initiative. It was created in 2011. The intent of CFWI is to implement effective and consistent water resource planning, development, and management throughout the CFWI area. From this map, you can see CFWI area consists of 5 counties, all the Orange, Osceola, Seminole, and Polk County, and the Southern Lake County. It covers about 5,300 square miles. And this area is characterized by 50 local and county governments. The city of the city of Orlando is the largest municipality in the CFWI planning area. However, the residential areas with the largest growth rates are in the north and the south of Orlando along the I-4 corridor. This area supports a large tourist industry and a growing industrial and commercial sector. Agriculture is the significant industry in the CFWI planning area, with citrus and cattle as the major commodities. Meanwhile, CFWI covers 3 water management districts. The red line shows the boundary of each water management district. It is important to have a collaborative effort among all the major stakeholders, including all the water management districts, for the Department of Environmental Protection, for the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences, water supply authorities, local government utilities, agriculture and industrial communities, environmental organizations, and other interested parties. So you can see this area has multiple stakeholders. So before I move on, I'd like to ask you another question. So Emily, if you can launch another poll. So will there be enough water in the future? I don't think I can see the answer. So I will probably give everyone 20 seconds to vote on that. And if you cannot vote, you can still put it in the chat box. So the pool, we can see about 30% said, yes, we will have enough water. 70% say we will not have enough water. So throughout this presentation, let's find out if we have enough water in the CFWI area. So these are the major challenges in CFWI. So the first, it's how to meet for future water demand and how to manage impacts to the area's water resources, including the ecosystem, and also how to improve overlapping programs among the 3 water management districts. The third challenge actually is the nature of multiple stakeholders. So before CFWI, water management districts worked independently. So the decision of one district regarding water permit may affect other the water resources in other districts. So now the 3 water management districts in CFWI region, including St. John's River Water Management District, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and the South Florida Water Management District, along with Florida Department of Environmental Protection and other stakeholders, are working together to develop regional water supply plan. So this slide shows you 2 regional water supply plans. On your left hand is 2015, and on your right hand is 2020. The regional water supply planning is required by by Florida statute for those regions where existing sources of water are not adequate to meet existing and future reasonable beneficial use and to sustain water resources in the natural systems. The water supply plans look 20 years into the future and include population and water demand projections and assessment of available water supplies to determine whether or not current and future demands can be met with fresh groundwater without harming Florida's natural systems. If there's not enough water, then plans need to identify the management strategies, water conservation, and alternative water supply projects to meet future demands. This plan must also identify funding options and update every 5 years. So like I mentioned at the beginning, CFWI just approved its next iteration of a regional water supply plan called the 2020 Central Florida Water Initiative Regional Water Supply Plan. You can see the cover, the plan cover on your right hand. As one of the work products, the CFWI technical team, along with the conservation team, developed this conservation implementation strategy. So this conservation implementation strategy is also a product of a collaborative effort. It has the major stakeholders, and it has the major stakeholders from the water management district and the local utilities. As I stated earlier, if there's not enough water, then the plan must identify the management strategies, water conservation, and alternative water supply projects. Similar to the 2015 Regional Water Supply Plan, the 2020 plan also indicates that traditional resources alone cannot meet future water demands or currently permitted allocation without resulting in unacceptable impacts to water sources and related natural resources. The 2020 CFWI plan identifies water conservation efforts, water supply, and water resource development projects options, and recognizes prevention or recovery strategies for targeted minimum flows and minimum water levels. Due to the length of this talk, I will just give an overview of the regional water demand and the supply projections without getting into the modeling details and water resource assessment. So the next talk, Dr. Taylor's talk, will give a closer look at the effectiveness of water conservation programs and how we can prioritize them to achieve a greater impact. So this table shows the 2020 water use and demand projection. It is a busy table, so we'll look at this table all together, category by category. So the first is a public supply, and the public supply category remains the largest use category, followed by agriculture. So overall, you can see the total water demand are projected to increase by 36% to 908 million gallons per day. The population is expected to increase from 2.9 million to 4.4 million by 2040. The domestic self-supply includes small public supply systems, which the annual average withdrawals are less than 0.1 million, a million gallon per day. And also the private wells. Let's move on to the agriculture column. So while for the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences indicates the irrigated agriculture acreage is projected to remain relatively stable with a slight decrease of 1%. Demand is expected to increase slightly due to the crop intensification. And the landscape and recreational category represents self-supplied water uses associated with irrigation, maintenance, and operation of golf courses, parks, and other large green areas. It is expected to increase 23% from 38 million gallons per day in 2015 to 47 million gallons per day in 2040. Commercial and industrial and institutional category represents self-supplied water use associated with production of goods or provision of service. It is projected to increase 29% from 54 million gallons per day to 69 million gallons per day. The power generation water demand is primarily associated with cooling and processing. Please note the water demand projections here are under the average rainfall condition. So in the case of a 1 in 10-year drought event, it is estimated that the total demand in 2020 could increase by an additional 11%, which is the equivalent of 103 million gallons per day. And the water use and the water demand listed in this table only includes traditional water supply sources, so which is surface and groundwater, and does not include reclaimed water use. When we look back at the 2015 plan, you can tell it's some water conservation strategies already taking effect. The 2015 plan projects the water demand in 2035 as 1,084 million gallons per day, which is 16% higher than the 2020 plan projection of the water demand in 2040. So it's kind of confusing here. As I asked the question earlier, is there enough water? So this diagram perfectly illustrates the current situation. So a little bit of background, it's until 1980, surface water was the largest source of fresh water in Florida. So basically after 1980, groundwater became the largest source of fresh water in Florida. Floridian aquifer system is the primary fresh water source in Central Florida. So look at this groundwater availability assessment. It indicates the further development of fresh groundwater withdrawal beyond the 760 million gallons per day. So as indicated by the yellow dashed line, trips the minimum flows and the levels within the region. Above 760 million gallons per day, 2 outstanding Florida Springs MFLs, which is minimum flows and the levels, will not be met, and additional wetland acreage is predicted to be stressed. In less than 5 years, based on the analysis, we could exceed our fresh groundwater availability. Last slide shows the total water demand in 2040 is 907 million gallons per day, and of which 855 million gallons per day is groundwater. As I mentioned, the Floridian aquifer system is the major water source. So to help meet the needs of the projected 2040 groundwater demand, the CFWI Regional Water Supply Plan has identified alternative water supply project options in the amount of 514 million gallons per day and a conservation potential in the amount of 50 million gallons per day, as indicated to the right of the yellow dashed line on this chart. So first, let's look at some water conservation savings. Water conservation is usually more cost effective than water supply projects, or at least they require less capital cost. Projected water conservation savings may not directly reduce the total water demands, as many water conservation measures focus on improved efficiency, which may allow such savings to meet increasing water demands. However, water conservation and demand management can reduce, defer, or eliminate the need to develop new water supply sources. Public water supply sector will result in most water savings. We'll have a closer look in the next slide. Water conservation measures for landscape and recreational water use category mainly focus on improving the efficiency of irrigation through retrofitting existing irrigation system with more efficient models. The use of smart irrigation controllers will also optimize irrigation while maintaining adequate landscape aesthetics. The projected water conservation for this category, landscape and recreational water use, is about 2 million gallons per day by 2040. And for public supply, in last slide, 2 slides ago, it's projected as 590 million gallons is needed for public water supply. Depends on different methods. It's projected to save for 41 million gallons per day to 44 million gallons per day in public supply. And these water savings are calculated in 2 categories. One is called passive water savings, another is active water savings. So for passive water savings refer to water savings that occur as a result of users implementing water conservation measures in the without public utility programs. So they are typically the result of property renovations or code and ordinance that required installation of high efficiency plumbing fixtures and appliances in new construction and renovation. So passive water conservations have been observed as a major contributor to reducing per capita water use across the country. And these water savings usually occur inside the house, indoor, and it's projected to be 17 million gallons per day by 2040. Another type of water conservation is active water conservation. I think I got the titles wrong. So you can see the left should be passive water saving and the right should be active water saving. So active water saving include a variety of measures and that are sponsored or encouraged by the public utility. Looking at the slides, I'm sorry, I noticed several typos. So just be clear, on your left hand, it should be passive water saving, which is without public utility programs. And on your right hand, it should be active water saving, which is with public utility programs. And these programs are usually, by the nature of this program, it's funded and administered by public utilities. And for this 2020 water supply plan, the projected active water conservation savings is between 24 to 27 million gallons per day. And overall, look at this table, overall, outdoor water use typically is the largest component of residential water use, especially for these homes with in-ground irrigation systems. So this table shows water savings between 2010 and 2019, and outdoor residential irrigation measures yield the largest water savings for public supply sector. Those practices include irrigation enforcement, landscape efficiency ordinance adoption, water conservation rate structures, advanced irrigation technologies, and education outreach. And to achieve long-term improvement in water use efficiency will require a combination of advanced technologies, best management practices, and other water conservation measures. Also, coordinated education, outreach, and public engagement are essential for promotion of water conservation in the CFWI region. And this is the press release I saw when I was working on this talk. Is the Polk local governments adopt Florida Water Star ordinance. So for those who don't know Florida Water Star, it is the water conservation certification program for new and existing homes and commercial development. Standards and guidelines for water efficiency include indoor fixtures and appliances, landscape design, and irrigation systems. It also encompasses some Florida-friendly landscaping practices. Local government within the CFWI planning area that have written Florida Water Star into ordinance include Davenport, Mulberry, Lake Everett, Lake Hamilton, Polk City, and Bartow. When we look back at this groundwater availability chart, conservation alone cannot meet the future demand. Alternative water supply options are also needed. Basically, any non-traditional supply source identified in a regional water supply plan is considered alternative water supply. It is projected 540 million gallons per day is needed from alternative water supply projects. And this table shows the different water supply projects, including brackish groundwater, reclaimed water, surface water, stormwater, and management strategies. And for management strategies, they include well field optimization, aquifer recharge, and natural system enhancement. And we look at the first category is brackish groundwater. The development of brackish non-traditional groundwater supplies account for 22% of the total projected number. It generally requires desalination or blending with other freshwater sources to reduce total dissolved solid concentration to acceptable levels. Desalination has a higher treatment cost than treating freshwater sources, such as surface water source, which contribute 63% of the total amount for alternative water supply options. Additionally, concentrate disposal can pose a challenge to brackish water supply development. An additional constraint in developing brackish groundwater supplies is the hydrogeology connections between the brackish and the freshwater portion of the Floridan aquifer system. As for reclaimed water, so far there are 77 wastewater treatment plants. So far, I think it was the 2015 data. So 77 wastewater treatment plants generated 218 million gallons per day treated wastewater collectively. 212 million gallons is reclaimed water. Reclaimed water is estimated to offset around 85 million gallons per day of potable quality water use. And reclaimed water is primarily used for irrigation, industrial uses, and aquifer recharge and environmental enhancement. Wastewater flows in CFWI are projected to increase by 55%, which is an estimation of 339 million gallons per day by 2040. Among 339 million gallons per day, 333 million gallons per day is estimated to be reused for beneficial purpose. So you can see the reclaimed water capacity has already exceeded 95%. With all the potential water savings and water supplies, so the next question is how can we get there? Another product of this collaborative effort is the shared responsibilities of funding options. So this slide provides a snapshot of funding options. And this is another press release I read late last year. Central Florida Water Initiative Steering Committee recently approved $287 $1,500 of funding support a 5-year project through a CFWI water conservation cost share program. These projects cost over $612,000 and are estimated to save nearly 50 million gallons of water a year, which is equivalent of 0.14 million gallons per day, and they are scheduled to be complete by November 2020. So to answer the question I asked earlier, will there be enough water? So the short answer is we can meet the water demand, but it must be a collaborative effort with active engagement of all the stakeholders, not only requiring expanded implementation of water conservation programs and the support for development and implementation of alternative water supply projects, but also better science to better understand the Floridan aquifer system, especially under climate change condition. And with that, and also on this slide, you can find some additional resources. Most CFWI related info you can find from their webpage, and you can also find a lot of good fact sheets related to water conservation and alternative water supplies on the EDIS page. And with that, I'd like to thank for your time and look forward to your questions and comments.
All right, thank you, Yilin. We've got a couple questions, but for others out there, if you have questions, type those in the chat. First question is, will drawdown of surface water contribute to less supply to the aquifer?
Surface water contribute less supply.
Will drawdown of surface water contribute to less supply to the aquifer?
You know,
That's a complicated question, I know.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the Floridan aquifer, it's just like Dr. Duke said, it's a very complicated. So we know it's several factors contribute to the groundwater level. So including it's our rainfall and also including the withdrawals. So far, I think the study agree on it's like the major these two are the major impact. So I don't know if I answer your question or not. It's a little bit complicated. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that in a sentence.
I can maybe add a little bit to that. I think it depends. It's like, you know, like your question, will there be enough water? It depends. And BJ puts a comment in that says probably yes, or the other alternatives would not be needed. But it depends on the hydrogeology, you know, the connectivity. What surface water are you talking about? What aquifer? Generally, the aquifer we're talking about here for supplies, the Floridan. So the surface waters are probably connected to the superficial aquifers and not necessarily to the Floridan. So anyway, next question. I thought I heard you say that surface water use used to be the main water supply, but it is now groundwater. Why did the water source change?
And it's generally speaking, treating surface water is more expensive than treating groundwater. So groundwater generally has a better water quality. All the treatment you need to do is just pump water out and disinfect it. So in that way, and also due to like the surface water, the ecosystem, and the switch to groundwater for that reason.
Okay, very good. Deirdre Irwin points out that Volusia is part of the CSEC regional plan because someone else earlier looking at your map pointed out that Volusia was not part of CFWI. So just clarification. Let's see here. If and to what extent the freshwater supply projections incorporate models and anticipated impacts of sea level rise and saltwater intrusion to freshwater resources?
And when I was reading that regional water supply plan, they did incorporate climate change model into the like water demand, but it just not to the extent also to like how it's going to affect surface water supply and groundwater supply. That's why that can be another like challenge to move forward. How can we incorporate climate change into the groundwater model and for future water demand estimation?
All right. It can be daunting to hear water usage described in terms of millions of gallons per day. I mean, conceptually, I can't even imagine what that is. How can extension professionals help individuals realize their individual impact?
That's a fantastic question. So that's also it's just like the mission of most extension agents. We're educating citizens, especially like for urban side, for homeowners, what we can do as an individual to save water. And from like the data showing most of water used in residential area is outdoors, and for those again, so usually for those homes with in-ground irrigation system. So teaching them how to properly water, because we know it's the image have the greenest yard in the neighborhood is still the mentality, and to tell them what's the right amount of water you need to irrigate and what's the right like especially another good example is FFL. Like I always say, the right plant, right place, right plant. So a good selection of landscape design will also help to reduce the water use in outside our house.
Do we have data regarding how much enforcement is being done at local government levels? Is there an idea on what government is doing in terms of enforcement? I think Nick's going to talk some to that, but if you want to say a few words on that.
There is, I cannot remember that on top of my head. It's there, it lists the local municipality, how they adopt the irrigation ordinance.
All right. BJ points out that she saw desalination mentioned. If so, since this area is not along the coast, where will the desal come from?
This desalination, it's not for seawater, it's more like for brackish groundwater.
Mm-hmm. So it's for aquifers that are already contaminated by intrusion, basically. Okay, so is there enough surface water to meet demand? Could water agencies be required to use surface water instead of groundwater?
That's also, it's being started, like how much surface water can be withdrawn, still meeting the minimum flow and the levels. So it started several major surface water bodies and identify, I forgot the numbers, like that million gallons of water, we can still withdraw that without tripping MFLs.
Yeah, so it's a balance between water supply and maintaining the quality of the natural resource, basically. One always hears of hundreds of millions of gallons of water are lost daily to tide. However, public supply projects / options never seem to address or speak to this. Are there missed opportunities here to address this if true?
That's a really good question. To be honest, I don't know the answer. I haven't heard of, in Central Florida, I haven't heard of public water supply sources are lost due to tides.
Normally we hear that in South Florida, right?
Mm.
Okay, let's see. Does CFWI include the villages? This is a long one, so you can go ahead and answer that and I'll read the rest.
Oh, so for CFWI, it doesn't, because the villages cover 3 counties, Sumter, Lake, and South Marion. And for CFWI, touch a little bit South Lake, which the villages is not included.
Okay, this is a multi-part question. I would encourage you all to try to keep your questions pithy, but the gist of this question is, can we encourage people to use reclaimed water? And I think you hit on that in your presentation. That's going to be a big future alternative water source.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. A little more. Okay.
So,
go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's a reclaimed water. It's a huge opportunity, but I also want to mention it's not just because it's reclaimed water, then you can water unlimitedly on your yard. That's another trend we've been seeing since it switched to reclaimed water, then the water conservation awareness seemed to fade out. So just one, like reclaimed water is one piece of the puzzle. But meanwhile, we still need to expand water conservation programs.
Okay, I'm gonna one more question from the audience, and then I have a question, and then we will switch over to Nick. What are the consumer education plans regarding use and application of the Florida-friendly landscaping principles? My understanding is that Floridans overwater their landscaping. This is a great question. It's going to play right into the next talk. This is attributed to lack of consumer education. You want to comment on that, Yilin?
I want to just briefly touch on that because I know Nick has more in-depth into this water conservation. So what we've been noticing for for homeowners, some of them, they are still using their out-of-state practice in Florida, so which also using the out-of-state plants in their Florida home without a good understanding what's the water need, and they are in the misunderstanding of water, like watering is the only way to keep your yard green.
Okay, last question. This is my question. So in the Western US, there are technologies and techniques being used. I think in LA County, Los Angeles is using treated wastewater to recharge the aquifer, and then they're withdrawing from those aquifers for drinking water. It's been called toilet to tap, not a great term if you want to buy into it, but has that technology been talked about?
Yes, it has been talked about the portable reclaimed water use. That's also been discussed in the regional water supply plan. And I think a big hurdle of that is how can we, it's a public education, let them know the water is, because it's toilet to tap, it's kind of scary, like you're drinking water off of your toilet. So it's how to educate homeowners their water is safe to drink.
It's that term is a negative connotation. There would be another name for it, whatever it is. But you know, think about the space shuttle. That's what they're doing. They're recycling water.
Correct.
So, well, Yilin, thank you very much. You can just imagine 120 people clapping right now. Great job. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Getting positive comments for your talk. So now we will switch over to Nick Taylor, who's gonna, I think you've teed his talk up really good based on some of the questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Yilin. That's excellent. I also saw some questions in the chat box that I'm going to try to address as I go forward. And if I can figure out the screen sharing. Okay. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Nick Taylor. I'm a state specialized extension agent. As Dr. Duke said, I work with the Program for Resource Efficient Communities and the Center for Land Use Efficiency, and I lead a program called H2O Save, Water Savings, Analytics, and Verification. And on the screen, you'll see my team. It's not all me here. We have data scientists and engineering, communication specialists, data analysts, and our director. We all work together to assist utilities, water management districts, local governments, anybody who will listen, help them make their conservation programs better. That's what we want. We want to save water. So we work with lots of folks, as we mentioned, partners around the state. This is just a sort of list of all those water management districts and all those utilities, and they are spread out like this. So we work with St. John's Utilities, Gainesville Regional Utilities, Sarasota County, Tampa Bay Water and their member governments, and in Central Florida Water Initiative territories. So what I'm going to talk about today is conservation programs and assessment in that CFWI area. Here's a look at the folks that we work with there. This is Toho Water Authority, Orange County Utilities, Orlando Utilities, Seminole County, City of Apopka, not as recently, but have worked with them. Someone was mentioning the this Central Florida area surrounding part of Disney, and that's Disney. Just to put it in context for everyone, the Reedy Creek District. And hopefully very soon we're going to have St. Cloud coming on board with us. We'll fill up this little hole. Somebody else asked about the Deseret Ranch. It does indeed cover this whole area. And this is the East Central Florida Services, is basically the utility that belongs to the folks who own Deseret Ranch. So hope that helps to clarify. So I'm not going to get in depth with all of the tools that we use on a regular basis, but I do want to just show you the overview of what those look like. So we have mapping tools to kind of give you spatial reference on where the high water use is, and that allows you to drill down to the lot level. We have targeting tools that help you look at both property features and consumption and focus conservation efforts on those who are most likely to save. We have an analysis tool that kind of shows you where the programs have been and gives you summaries of savings for those, and just a view for individual property. All of these tools are driven by data that we receive from our utility partners. We receive the utility data, we match it with property appraisal data, we match it with census data for what that's worth, for census block group type things. And then we analyze that data to see different patterns. We want to know where the conservation programs have been implemented. Someone asked about the irrigation restriction enforcement. That savings that you saw for CFWI was largely a result of efforts of Toho Water Authority and Orange County Utilities. They've really been pushing those programs hard. So where the things are implemented, and then what's the scale of implementation? How many, I would say, participants, how many people have they touched in it over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And then what are the savings from that program? And so that's what I'm going to talk about now. We're going to really kind of dive in on savings. I'm going to see if I can get my slides up and going. So again, the title of the talk today was Evaluating and Comparing Conservation Programs. And there's 4 things that we want to look at in terms of, is this a good program? Is it worthwhile? We want to look at effectiveness. Does it save water at all? And then, is that water savings significant? And I'm not talking here about statistical significance. I mean, is it a meaningful amount of water savings? You could have, a large set of participants with, 3 gallons a day of savings, and that could be statistically significant, but on the scale that we need to address the issues of Central Florida Water Initiative and lots of other folks around the state, it's not significant at that level. So that's what I mean by significance. Reliability. Is that savings reliable in the aspect of, will all of the participants in this program really see water savings? And I'll give you an example of that one. Let's say it's a toilet rebate program. Someone gets the toilet rebate and they put it up in the guest bathroom on the 2nd floor, and nobody ever uses it. well, we will expect different savings than someone that replaces the main toilet that everyone uses in the house. So that's what I mean by reliability. And then persistence. When we see a change in the consumption, does it persist? And how long does it persist? Does it last year over year over year? Is that going to be something that we can count on in an ongoing way as we talk about alternative water supply and think about our future resources? Are the savings persistent? So let's look at a couple of examples. This is sort of a leak, spike in use related to probably a leak. If the utility were to contact this person and we see this drop off in consumption, that savings, that would be, very effective. We would see a lot of savings if we look at the difference between this, 1,200 gallons per day, and it drops to somewhere around 300. That's a big savings. That's effective, and it's significant. We saw the savings. It's a significant amount of savings, and it would probably be a reliable program in that if you contact folks and they have a leak and if you see this giant spike, people respond very readily to that in the data that I've seen from utilities. So I think this probably meets 3 of those criteria. And yeah, it's probably worthwhile, but how long can you count these savings? This person would have probably fixed that eventually anyway. So in terms of looking at that as a source of alternative water supply, yeah, we could count it for a few months, but we probably can't count these savings as something that would have, a reduction that we made that lasted 10 years. So here's another example. This is a new home. You can see sort of that January 2016, this thing started to come online, had some water use. The blue is potable indoor, the purple is reclaimed. So this is sort of landscape establishment, and you see that's around 1,500 gallons per day, and then that tapers off. And here, I believe they had a irrigation evaluation, and now we see this reduction in use, and it's lasting for across these years. Now, the reason that this is an important example, Toho Water Authority, among others, are really trying to focus in on new residential where landscape irrigation controllers are set to an establishment mode, basically watering every day, and then they never get dialed back. And we can see examples where that may run on that daily schedule for years, may run for a year or 2 before anyone dials it back. And that's a really significant amount of savings. If they can get out to those homeowners at maybe a 3-month period and get that controller dialed back to a regular schedule, see very large savings and persistent savings over the course of time. So those are just a couple of examples to keep in mind as we discuss sort of what makes an effective program. So I've been doing some analysis of conservation programs, and I rolled these up across 4 utilities in Central Florida Water Initiative area, just to get a general sense of, does this type of program work? And so an audit or evaluation, irrigation evaluation program. There were a lot more. I analyzed just about 2,600 of those and found a savings of 120 gallons per day. This is largely, I expect that these savings are largely from broken irrigation heads, or just at the bare minimum, a timer reset where it had a much too long of a runtime, or watering more often than it should. The second was a smart irrigation controller program. So this grouping includes soil moisture sensors and ET controllers. I think it was a small group of each, and so 116 gallons per day on average for those. Again, some higher and some lower. And now irrigation restriction enforcement. Of course, we have the questions there. So very large contributor to those savings in CFWI. And the reason is there's a very large number. You know, we're looking at 43 gallons per day, and it's effective. And 43 gallons is significant. It's not up at the, you know, evaluation level or a smart controller, but it's helpful. But when you do it on this scale, it's 15,000. Actually, that doesn't even account for them because I filtered the data to get the most reliable ones in terms of not having bias in the analysis of savings. So 43 gallons, but a lot of implementations, and that's how we get those that big impact for CFWI. And then toilet retrofits, 31 gallons per day savings on the toilet. And I've looked across a lot of areas. I looked at, you know, up in Gainesville, 4 programs down in Central Florida, documentation from the water management district, from, well, the 3 water management districts affiliated with CFWI. And that's pretty solid average savings for a toilet. It hovers right around 30 gallons per day, and it's very reliable savings. It takes more effort, costs more money than the irrigation restriction enforcement, but it's very reliable. And you know, you would expect those savings to persist for quite a while as that toilet, you know, unless something breaks inside the toilet, it starts to leak, or you know, any other reasons, you would expect that savings to remain fairly steady. I apologize, this is a little bit blurry. I didn't realize that. I hope it looks okay for you all. So it's not just about the savings here and this average savings, but now how can we sort of improve those savings? How can we improve our outcomes? And this chart is, each dot represents a program from a different utility. And on the x-axis, we have pre-intervention daily consumption. How much were they using beforehand? And on the y-axis, we have savings after the intervention. How much did they save? So I don't think this is surprising to anyone, and it's not rocket science. But you know, we focus on those high users because they have more savings potential, more conservation potential. And that's illustrated pretty clearly here. People using, you know, 200 to 300 gallons per day, they're seeing savings at around, you know, 25 gallons per day for toilet retrofits. And then you have people up at this 425 range on average, and they're seeing much higher savings.
Hey, Nick, is that per home or per person?
This is average per home. So, and these dots represent a program. So let me make sure that I'm representing this properly. You have a suite of people who have homeowners who have got this toilet retrofit rebate from a utility. And one dot represents all of those homeowners in that utilities program. Different utility, different program, different utility, different program. So and then just looking at sort of how much those folks used beforehand versus how much they saved as a group. Did that answer the question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was just, is it per home or per person?
Yeah.
Per home is what I heard.
Per home, yes. So this is toilet retrofit, and we talked about how that's 31 gallons per day. But let's move to that audit or evaluation. Again, how much did they use before? How much did they save after? See 2 programs where, you know, consumption between 300 and 400 gallons per day, and see savings around 60 gallons. And then we have the high users, and the high savers. And so they tend to cluster that way. We focus heavily on targeting those high users for this reason. And that's how we can really help to improve the conservation program outcomes. I believe many of you were on the at our session last week, but I want to go back to something that Mike Sweeney talked about. I want to go back to his program, and I want to explain maybe in a little bit more detail the significance of what they're doing. I'm really thrilled with their take on it. And we've been working with Toho for quite a while, and so they got a cost share. They get cost share funding from South Florida Water Management District. They're going to look at 100 residential customers, but they're targeting folks that use 1,500 gallons of water per day. And then they're going to go out at no cost to the homeowner and install smart irrigation controllers and efficient irrigation heads. And I'm going to just go through a little exercise and let's talk about that savings. So 1,500 gallons per day is about 45,000 gallons per month. And I put these here just, in case your bill comes in kilogallons or gallons, you'll kind of have a good sense of it. Sorry about that. So they use 1,475 gallons per day, this group. And indoor, we see pretty consistently looking at dual meter homes, tens of thousands of dual meter homes across Florida. 150 gallons per household per day is pretty standard for indoor water use on average. So if we subtract these two, then that means they're using 1,325 gallons per day outdoor. So this baseline, if you look in Toho's territory, the typical irrigator, they're using about 300 gallons per day outside. And puts them up at 450 or 500 gallons indoors. So if we can get these folks down to the normal, we have over 1,000 gallons per day per customer saved. That's going to provide savings that very few programs can compete with. It's really going to be a significant program, and 100 of these will go very far. And now just I wanted to get down to, so where's the break-even point? If we have these high folks, or not break even, but zero gain, I guess. We have these high users. If you were to go down, and I kind of did a little sensitivity analysis, how low do you have to go to get this to zero? But at 14 kgal per month, that's about 500 gallons per day. Remember that normal irrigator? Indoor use, outdoor use, baseline, you're only going to get 9 gallons per day. So with that expensive program, yes, it's expensive to buy ET controllers and roll trucks and get people out there and install these things at no cost to the homeowner. So if you're going to do that, you have to kind of shoot for the stars, and you can't make, it's not worth it at this level. With that said, looking at some of the programs and past costs that Toho has shared with me, this is going to be one of their most cost-effective programs. And I'm not sure, I'm going to try to pull this other document over just, so we'll take a look at it. Escape here and put this here. So again, back to that irrigation restriction enforcement, Toho says that that's 39 cents per kgal saved, and that runs all the way up to irrigation audits at $7.50. This program, if they meet their goals, installing smart controllers and getting those high users down to that baseline outdoor consumption is going to fall between these two numbers, and generally closer to this 39 cents. And so in terms of measuring program impacts and how do we increase program impacts and what's most effective, it's really, I hope I've hammered it enough. It really is about targeting those high users and how can you get to them, because that's when our savings will be effective and significant and reliable and persistent. So with that, I'll take any questions that you all have.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. Again, as with Yilin, you can imagine about 120 people clapping and appreciating your talk. I'll get right into the questions. So comments and questions. So Stacy Greco points out that they see the same thing in Alatra with respect to controllers left on at establishment. And I think anecdotally, we hear this from around the state, and we've heard the same thing. We heard the same thing last week, actually, and that was one of the interventions with Lennar Homes that Rick Hudak reported on with Pasco County Extension, and working with the developer. And once they realized it, they realized this was an issue and going on. They didn't go back to their old ways. Let's just put it that way. So Stacy points out that they send out a 6-month letter and a 1-year letter after installation with information on settings and water conservation. So more of a comment, anything. Let's see. This one's from Jennison. About your slide, effective, significant, reliable. Should a drop in water use following a significant acute spike count as savings, even if the post-spike use doesn't drop below the baseline?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So it depends. Did the utility, was the utility proactive? Are they the ones who help contact the customer and get that, whatever the leak was, fixed? And one good example is Clay County Utilities. They have an AMI system. They have a very basic algorithm. Basically, if
What's
it doesn't,
AMI? Describe AMI.
oh, sorry. Automated metering infrastructure. So that's sort of electronic meters that are read automatically once every hour, and that data goes to the utility. If your water use doesn't go down to zero within I believe it was 24 or 48-hour period, can't remember, but they contact you immediately. And they have had tremendous drops in water use. And there is, I think that Jensen, you are correct, and there's a debate about how long you can count those savings, but it really is about the proactivity of the utility. We can't just count everybody who's dropped from a spike, but if it's the utility that instigates that, then they do claim credit for it. Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. What is the largest consumption of, the question is groundwater, but let's just say water by residential consumer? Toilet, shower, dishwasher, clothes washer, landscape?
Irrigation.
Yeah.
Irrigation. There's no, I could be wrong about this, but I don't think there's a faster way to pump water out of the pipes than the irrigation system. You have the distributed irrigation heads, and it uses a ton of water very quickly.
So here's a bonus question for you and for everyone else. What's the largest indoor use of water? Toilet, dishwasher, sink. I actually have the answer in front of me. Anybody want to weigh in 10 seconds? 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we've got showers, toilet, showers. It depends. Dishwasher. Okay. Toilets, 27% used indoors. Clothes washers, 22%. 17% used for showering. 16 faucets, et cetera, et cetera. 14% nationwide due to leaks.
Yeah.
And, H2O save, right? You can use that to identify leaks. Okay, let's see, more questions. Well, comment, seems like irrigation audits have a great impact on water savings, though I think, Nick, you pointed out they're pretty expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a reduction in South Florida and use some mobile irrigation labs. Those are the ones that are publicly funded to do audits. So there's very few of those left. Okay, great question here from Stacy. Targeting high water users for rebate programs is hard to explain to some citizens as they perceive it as rewarding water wasters. Not only that, but it's also perceived, and you could argue it is an equity issue, right? You're taking everyone's money, and a lot of times you're spending that on people who are wealthier. She says, has anyone found good ways to frame this messaging? So, Nick, if you want to say a few words on that,
Sure,
you can.
absolutely. I mean, I think I understand where it's coming from, but if our goal is to save water, we have to go where the water is being used. And, you know, we could spread it out, but we wouldn't be as effective. We just wouldn't. I think, though, Orange County Utilities have another great idea for a program that I am looking forward to. And they're just going to target these high users and just see what they can do to go out and help them reset their irrigation timer. That's the whole program, but not going for the whole idea for the program, not going for a full evaluation. Just go and help reset the timer. That's it. Timer first, then look at the other stuff. And you know, a lot of what Toho is going to accomplish with these smart controllers would like to be accomplished by resetting the irrigation timer, you know. But in order to get these folks to participate, they need to, they're going this other route with just smart controllers. So,
yeah, just to add on to that, one thing I wanted to ask the panel last week, but we ran out of time, and I want to put it address it in the blog post is one thing that Adam Jones, Massey Services, mentioned was that in general in Florida, irrigation is not done very well, and FNGLA has had a multi-year initiative to try and get that changed. There's a voluntary license program, but there's no mandatory. In most municipalities, there's very little requirement to become an irrigation contractor. You just need a business license. And you know, what we see is a lot of systems they're not put in based on best practices. They're just kind of doomed from the start to waste water. So that's just I don't know if we can answer that, but I wonder why. And that's kind of the root cause of a lot of our problems here.
mm-hmm.
Jennison asks, can you go back to the slide, your first example of effective, significant, reliable slide? I think she wants to take a look at it.
Yeah.
So Stacy, I don't know that we really adequately answered your question there.
No, probably not
an easy answer.
No.
Cesar comments, this type of information needs to be sent to local decision makers because they're eliminating mobile irrigation labs, even though that's an effective practice.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon Carnival asks, are you looking to onboard additional communities? If yes, what requirements or features would you be looking for in those possible communities? I think she may be talking about utilities. Maybe.
Yeah, hi Shannon. We are at a point right now where we would love to work with more communities, but we're at this sort of, we're about at the limit for the staff that we have now. I do look forward to growing H2O Save program to other counties or other municipalities. In the meantime, though, I would be glad to work with any communities to talk about the methods that we use and what we do and how it might be implemented. With that said, we do have St. Cloud coming on board in the very near future, but yes, I would love to talk more about that. And I will just share one screen with you. There's a Get Involved page, h2osave.billgreen.org. And I'm going to put it right there in the comments.
Great.
And yeah, that has information about sort of what we do, the data that we collect, and really how to get started with that conversation.
Okay, got a comment here about working with people in Marion County, telling a homeowner that has a home purchased after 1995 that they don't qualify for a rebate because their home was built after. So whatever program this is targeting older homes pre-95. Yeah,
that would be toilet rebate programs. Yep,
right.
for sure. And that's because the code changed in 94 to require them to be more efficient. So if you really want savings, you get the older toilets.
Let's see, related to that, Marion County is working on a new homeowner packet to educate new residents. Cesar mentions Miami-Dade County has an irrigation retrofit program, which pays cost shares part of the irrigation upgrade. And that's managed by the Urban Conservation Unit at IFAS Miami-Dade County Extension, funded by the utility. Alicia says, I would love to see an extension-led program such as the Toho project, perhaps use trained volunteers to support the human resource. Imagine 100 high users in every county. Is there any conversation about this as a possibility?
Yes, there is, and we would love to do that. There's going to be more communication coming from H2O Save program. It's going to be more work with our extension agents in the field, and yeah, that's part of the progress we're hoping to see in the near future.
Stacy says, amen, add irrigation to the building code we were talking about earlier. Don Rainey asks, have utilities considered adopting gray water technologies for irrigation?
I don't know about that one.
I can comment on that one.
Yep.
I think there's a Department of Health thing with gray water. Other people on here probably know a lot more about it than I do. So feel free to comment, but I think there's an issue of that the gray water in Florida, our particular way our laws are, they're not conducive to having that as a system, unfortunately. Okay, so someone here is pointing out that St. Augustine grass requires a lot of water. Drought tolerant ground covers would be better. Yeah, well, it's right plant, right place, right? You know, St. Augustine can be managed. It doesn't have to be a water hog. I think in a lot of places we're putting on poor soils and things like that, that we heard a little bit about that last week about companies like Massey Services and others are using compost. And we got coming up, some of our specialists are going to talk about the compost research that's been done. And next week is alternative ground cover, so stay tuned. Let's see. Got a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to read them.
Yeah.
I got to quit talking, just read. How much effort is going towards reducing the amount of turf grass in landscapes and also increasing use of plants appropriate to the property? Let me amend that a little bit. Irrigated turf grass.
I know that Stacy is working on a program here in Alachua County, turf swap. I know that people do that in other places. Certainly, our Florida Friendly program is working toward that, and Master Gardener program. We're all on board with it, and we're working towards it. I think some of the things that I've seen from utilities or municipalities are more related to landscape ordinances and maybe limiting some of the irrigation, basically pushing toward WaterStar. I know I've talked a lot about Toho Water Authority, but they are working with their builders and developers to basically try to incentivize them to reduce the lot size, reduce irrigation in the backyard, and diversify the plant palette. And essentially, they started with the WaterStar program and have kind of built on that over the years. They have a fairly progressive program that's actually required for all new homes.
Right, and we heard about that a little bit last week as well. We're in Toho and in on top of the world, Marion County. They're reducing the size of the irrigated landscape. That question was from Bob Stantz. Bob, good to hear from you. Hope you're doing well. Ben Belusky points out, thanks for this, Ben. Remind me that FNGLA just launched its 6th professional certification for the industry, the FNGLA Landscape Irrigation Service Technician certification. So the idea is to provide education to the industry to, just get better doing at what we're doing, whether it's putting in landscapes, irrigation systems, whatever. Amelia Brown, glad to hear from you, Amelia. Among the high water users, to what extent did or do pools or other non-irrigation uses of water contribute to the high usage?
Actually, not very much. People with pools do have higher water use, but not nearly to the extent that you might think. Unless their pool has a leak, it actually requires very little water input other than rainwater. There's certainly some spikes that we see with people who've had issues with their pools and have to refill and things like that. But ongoing increased water use is somewhat minimal.
Yeah, we've looked at that in the past in some of the work that we've done, and my N=1 anecdotal knowledge is I pump my pool out way more than I put water in it. We just get a lot of rainfall. So unless they, like you said, Nick, unless their automatic refill system, if they have one, unless that is messed up, then it's probably not as big of a problem as it is in, say, Arizona or Nevada, desert climates. Paula Staples, we were just chatting about this. Perhaps it's time to recognize the limited root zone available in new homes. Watering this type of landscape requires differing practices. Bad soils. We talked a little bit about that last week too.
Mm-hmm.
Tatiana says, based on the data presented during the first presentation, it seemed that enforcement of water conservation policies ordinance resulted in good savings. However, enforcement is very limited in most places. Has that been discussed to dedicate funds to increase county's ability to increase enforcement?
Well, we certainly talked about it a lot with the CFWI conservation team, and that it's now sort of on their list of conservation practices as sort of a target. And it would be great to see increased funding for that. I don't know of any place that is decided that is actively increasing the funding for it, though.
Another question about gray water. I just related my understanding that the regulations really are not conducive to using gray water, to having like a dual system in your house. I could be off base, but you don't see it here at all. You don't even see people talking about it, any commercial options really. So if anyone knows, put it in the comments and I'll read it out. Are there aggressive water savings programs such as these in the Panhandle? Good question. H2O Saves not in the Panhandle yet. Is that right, Nick?
That is true. We've not been in the Panhandle. I have done some work with data from Tallahassee's utility. That was probably more related to energy, but we have talked with them, but no, we're not active in any of the communities up there.
I think it goes back to the future water demand issue. It's not as much there as it is in the peninsula of Florida, particularly CFWI. Stacy says, with AMI, it seems you could do irrigation enforcement from a desk. Indeed.
Yes, why? Yes, you can. And Toho Water Authority does that. I believe that, well, I know for a fact that OUC sent out some mailers to high water users, and those were automated basically in the same way, looking at short interval data and seeing who, essentially, if you water this many times over the course of the week, you must be breaking the restrictions, no matter which side of the road you're on. So
it's kind of like, I know in parts of Europe, they have, on toll roads, they'll use, when you go through tolls, they'll use that to track your average speed. They know whether you're speeding or not, and they'll just mail you your ticket. Yilin, thanks. Yilin points out, after March 1st, 2009, the Florida Building Code was updated and specifies that gray water may only be used for flushing of toilets and urinals. and any discharge from the building must be connected to a public sewer or an on-site sewage treatment disposal system in accordance with Chapter 64E-6 Florida Administrative Code. Landscape irrigation is no longer included as a permitted use of gray water in the Florida Building Code. There you have it. Parker Johnson points out the Serenbe community outside of Atlanta uses a combination of gray/reclaimed water for all properties. Yeah, it goes down to local ordinances. Chris Claus points out many utilities are waiting for the state to issue guidelines or update the building code. Tatiana thanks Stacy for something. And Don points out that current legislation is directing the study use of gray water technologies. You have a comment, Nick? We got just a few.
No, I was just saying that thanks for Stacy. Let's go. She's awesome. Hi, Stacy.
Andrea, this will probably be the last question about gray water systems. We had a question from a septic system owner who wanted to separate gray water for subsequent use from his black water. Department of Health told us that he would have to put in a separate septic system for his gray water. That's consistent with the information that Yilin put in the chat. So pretty much a barrier. Well, look, here we are. We're at 2:30. A lot of good conversation, and I want to thank both Yilin and Nick for your presentations and your time, and thank you to all the participants who were here. We'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Have a good day.